morning and welcome to DeHavilland's latest video. We attempted to do it live, you might have seen earlier, but we're now doing a pre-recorded version to hopefully eliminate the possibility of any technical difficulties. Today's video we're doing with the PRCA Public Affairs Board, and we would obviously normally do our videos from a studio, and I'd have the pleasure of talking to our guests face to face. But this morning we are obviously all in our respective homes, so still face to face in a way, but it does feel slightly different. But in a way that's really apt for what we'll be talking about this morning. We're going to be discussing what it's like really to be doing public affairs at this time during a pandemic. Everyone's working from home, including our politicians, and the immediate outlook is somewhat uncertain, and I think it's fair to say that certainly nothing about this feels very normal, so everyone is adapting. To talk this over with me, I'm really delighted to welcome two guests who are members of the PRCA Public Affairs Board. It's co-chair George McGregor, who is managing partner at Interrel, and Tiffany Burrows, who is chair of the Next Gen group for the Public Affairs Board and also head of Health, Employment and Education at Newington Communications. Welcome to you both, and thanks for coming along today. George, can I start with you? Over the last 2 to 3 weeks, what's it been like for you and your colleagues day to day? How have you been working? How have you been adapting?
Well, I've been involved in politics and public affairs since I left university in the late 1980s, and I've never had 2 or 3 weeks like it. We've been through the demise of Margaret Thatcher, the coming of New Labour, Brexit, various wars, various economic crashes, but nothing like this. I've also dealt with many crises with clients. But what's different on this occasion is we're seeing multiple crises happen simultaneously. So we, in our business, and I know speaking to lots of colleagues in the profession, we've never been busier because clients are really facing a reckoning. You know, the state, the government has intervened to say that our clients' workers can't come to work, and businesses in travel and tourism and other sectors and leisure and recreation can't operate. It's attacking the very being of their businesses. And you know, public affairs, because we are the interface between our clients and governments, it's you know, we've been right at the center of the storm trying to help our clients during this difficult period.
Yeah, and you work in an agency, so what's that been like? Is that about trying to interpret what's coming from government, or trying to influence what's about to come from government? Where's the focus sort of tended to be in such a movable feast?
Both, because you think about the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Chancellor's delivered 3 budgets in the last 3 weeks, and it looks like he's going to have another financial statement in the near future. So you know, clients need to know what's happening. Every single day, the government is revising its regulations. You know, it's guidance on furloughing, its assistance package to business. So we you know, part of our job is to ensure that our clients know about these changes. And actually, in the last couple of weeks, we spent more time than ever before working with some of the senior finance people within our clients and with the HR people, just to interpret what these changes actually mean. And then the second part of your question is, well, you know, how can we influence or change government opinion? And honestly, the government deserves a huge amount of credit, and the officials, the MPs and the ministers that we deal with, because they have been incredibly receptive to the needs of business and listening to business, because we do share the same goal to try and ensure that the business community in particular, and the many other organizations that we work with, you know, it's a kind of existential threat to many of their existences, and the government doesn't want to see them go out of business. It wants to come out of this and to recover, and for us to bounce back afterwards. In order to do that, we really need, you know, government recognizes it needs to listen to business and to adapt. And I can give you lots of examples of that with our clients.
Thanks, George. And Tiffany, what about you in terms of your clients? I mean, how are they adapting? What are you having to do differently for them that maybe you don't have to do normally, or you don't have to do in the same way?
First of all, I want to say I completely agree with everything George has said so far, in terms of, it's interesting to see as well. It's a week and a half into lockdown, and already this is starting to feel like the new normal in terms of communicating with our clients. So obviously a lot of us will have clients outside of London if we operate in London, or Birmingham or Manchester or Edinburgh, but it's how you speak to them normally, and where a phone call would suffice, now we tend to do video calls, and make sure that communication is it's difficult, because I want to say is much more precise, but it tends to, I'd like to think it tends to be anyway, but I think it's in terms of making sure that you're only taking the amount of time of your clients that is absolutely necessary, because as George said, they're dealing with a completely unprecedented situation for their own businesses, and so a couple of our clients are trade bodies, and they're dealing with the inquiries from a number of different businesses, whether small, medium or large businesses that are facing problems but of different natures. So where before we've potentially had scheduled calls at specific times and we know exactly what's going on, it will be, we're here if you need us, but we appreciate right now that you're extremely busy. Come to us when you're ready, or let us know what you need and when you need it by. I think that the communicating within the agency is quite different as well. So where normally you'd have a question, you'd kind of get up and go and talk to someone at the desk to ask them a question. It seems to be a lot more scheduled calls and checking in to make sure everyone's doing okay, frankly, because a lot of this is new for everybody, and while some people are used to working from home potentially a few days a week, it's very different to being at home kind of all day on your own, potentially with flatmates or partners or other people. So yeah, it's been interesting, and it's certainly been challenging.
And do you feel like you're starting to settle into a new sense of routine, or do you feel like actually it's important to remain quite fleet of foot because this is so changeable from day to day?
I think you can have a routine and still be flexible, and I think the flexibility is absolutely critical at the moment. For example, in terms of moving internal meetings or calls around when you have emergency calls from clients, or everybody knows that, including my own family, that you don't speak to me at 5 because I'm going to be watching the government press conference, as are most other people. But having a routine is really helpful in the sense of not losing track of days, or kind of making sure you're still structuring your own time and prioritizing your own work in a way that is probably a lot easier to slip working from home than it is surrounded by people and colleagues in the office. But yeah, flexibility is absolutely crucial.
And as an industry, I mean, George, to what extent are you, well, it's a question for both of you really, but maybe George, you first, to what extent are you talking to colleagues beyond your immediate organisations? I'm thinking in particular, we're obviously talking a lot about agency work here, but actually for in-house teams, what's it looking like for them? Is there a sort of sense of how the industry as a whole is needing to mobilise?
Yes, absolutely. You know, we're talking to our clients, the in-house teams that we deal with in our clients every single day, and just as the gear has changed in consultancies, the gear has changed for in-house teams. The in-house, you know, I've in regular contact with many clients in their bedrooms, in their living rooms, in their studies. We're getting much closer to clients and their personal lives than I have done before as well. And they are working incredibly hard. As I say, working, you know, directly to the chief executive, to the finance chief, to the HR chief, you know, because the kind of decision, to me, this is the public affairs has never been more relevant than today. You know, we're right at the heart of trying to help protect the continuity of our clients, and our in-house teams are just as busy, and they too are juggling with the very same things that Tiff has just spoken about everybody being at home. They're having to liaise with their colleagues. Whenever I try to speak to clients, they're always on a conference call or a video call, and I think that is one of the things that we can all reflect on. I think there's almost too much happening, and we all need to begin to ration just how much information is just out there. You know, with Twitter alerts, with email alerts, the number of emails has soared in the last few weeks, with video calls, with all of us trying to stay in touch with government announcements. You think as a public affairs professional, you really have to try and tone down the noise and really focus on exactly what it is that you're trying to do on behalf of clients? What is it that the client really needs help with, and how can you add that value? And that's what I've been saying to my team, really focus on the added value that public affairs consultants can bring, and that the public affairs in-house teams can bring in terms of helping their companies.
Yes. And what about, you mentioned government, and obviously, I mean, everyone in this environment is adapting, everyone is incredibly busy. You've talked about the importance of public affairs. What's the sort of reaction from people that you're talking to within government? Are they quite keen to talk because they actually need a flow of information, or are they so sort of busy in some cases that maybe public affairs doesn't feel as important to them as it might do at other times? What's that feeling like?
No, as I would take my hat off to the government and to the civil service in particular. I feel they're really responsive. You know, they don't work 9 to 5 anymore. They don't push back on meetings. You know, if you've, you know, clearly you need to go with a serious proposition, you know, that shifts the dial. You can't waste people's time at a moment like this. But if you go with a serious proposition that can genuinely help their clients, and then people are listening, and they'll act if they can. Clearly, you know, there are constraints, you know, and there's some tension. Sometimes one department wants to do things and Treasury is pushing back. But that's just the kind of normal heartbeat of public affairs and navigating your way through the complexities of that kind. Yeah.
Tiffany, obviously, I think it's fair to say that most public affairs professionals are people. Given this time where it's not possible to have meetings in person, it's not possible to, you know, bump into somebody, it's not possible to arrange to have a meeting. How does that change the way that the industry needs to approach the next potentially 2-3 months if this does continue in this way?
I think that's a really important point, but I think it's worth mentioning that MPs also tend to be people, as well as ministers. So I think it's something that they're adjusting to as well. I've had a couple of clients who have had, definitely had a couple of clients who have attempted, and we've had successful video calls with ministers or conference calls with MPs and other stakeholders. So for them, it's difficult as well, because part of it is building a personal relationship, working out, you know, what message is going to land the most efficiently and effectively. So it is tricky, I think. So for me personally, I'm currently onboarding a new client, and I think that's extremely difficult, having not had the initial face-to-face meeting and almost kind of personality tests and things. So I think that it's communicating more frequently while still being aware that you don't want to take too much of their time, as George and I have both spoken about. I also think that as a general thing, full stop, whether it's public affairs professionals, MPs, civil servants, everyone is learning to be just that little bit more patient with each other. So we talked about it before when we were talking about the tech not working. Everybody's patience is being tested in an enormous amount of ways, both in terms of waiting for information. If you're running a business, for example, you have got all sorts of concerns at the moment, and there's only so much bandwidth you have to deal with those. And so patience and flexibility is definitely something that public affairs professionals are going to need to employ to cope with that kind of people void. How many times can I say people?
Void, yeah. And are there things that actually during that people void it's easier to do, or that might usually be on the back burner, but actually it's a good time to bring them to the fore in terms of using this time productively?
It's difficult because things are still extremely busy. So in terms of the day-to-day engagement and communicating with clients, working on requests, and as George said, you have to be so specific with what you're asking when you're asking to meet with people or discuss things, because government don't have the bandwidth either at the moment. They need to focus on the absolute priorities. So whilst that's still going on, I think there is an argument if the engagement is potentially slower than it would be usually. Obviously, we've got recess, but again, could the virtual parliament last longer? What does that look like? Things like that. I think time needs to be carved out for how you communicate better with government and MPs at the moment, because this is a unique situation. And also, what is the most important thing for you to get across? Because previously, again, we only had the first proper budget. God, it was less than a month ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. But that budget was really important for the majority of our clients, and yet it's changed on a week by week, often daily basis, and the priorities of these businesses will change on a week to week and daily basis. So it's in terms of interpreting what is important and how to convey that, I think, is probably what we'd spend time on outside of the engagement.
Okay, thanks. George, how are you finding it possible to plan, to think about, you know, what we could be doing now that will be really important in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months? I mean, you know, we've all talked about how fast changing this is. There's been a lot of changes in terms of regulations, you know, that are having an effect right now, but also there's that sort of sense that perhaps some of those changes could change the conversation further down the line. You know, do you think this is a time to try and do big policy thinking or thought leadership, things like that, or could it become that if it's not right now?
Yeah. I think I would rewind the clock. We had a general election in December. It produced a decisive Conservative majority, and it changed the terms of debate in the UK. All of our clients had to reprioritise to an agenda that talked about Brexit Britain, and it talked about levelling up. Now, who knows where this pandemic is going to lead us? Who knows how bad it's going to be and how much damage is going to be done to the economy? But what I believe is, when you look ahead, is that this pandemic will change the terms of debate. It will be less about Brexit, less about levelling up. And I think the clever clients, the clever companies, will be thinking ahead to, well, what's the new agenda of the government? And undoubtedly it's going to be about recovery. You know, how do we recover from this crisis? It's not going to be able, you know, when the current restrictions on staying in our homes are lifted, we're not just going to go back to business as usual. Companies won't just go back to business as usual. I think we're going to be in a period of recovery for some months, and it may well go into next year. And that will be the government's priority, rather than, of course, it wants to get Brexit done, and of course it wants to level up. And I think the clever clients will be thinking, well, how do they align their messaging, their asks, you know, of government within the context of a national recovery programme? So I think that's the, you know, I laughed when you said planning ahead in 3 to 6 months. It's really hard to plan ahead when you're completely overwhelmed with work at the moment. But that's what the savvy client should be doing. You know, thinking about how the terms of debate will have changed. Arguably, even although we've just got this big majority Conservative government, we could be in an era of big government or bigger government. It's going to take some time for all of this government regulation to unwind. So potentially for the rest of this Parliament, you know, we're going to have a higher deficit, higher spending, a bigger role for government and regulation. So that's the kind of things people need to be thinking about at this time when they get a quiet moment.
Thanks, George. And Tiffany, in the areas that you sort of focus on at Newington around health and education and employment, are you sensing, obviously, people are having to react very much in the moment to the things that they are being called upon to do right now, and that is true of health and education and employment, as we can see. But are you getting a sense that there might be an appetite for you know, changes to policy thinking, or a different way of thinking about policy that could arise from this you know, incredible time?
I think the difficult one is health. So health clients at the moment are understandably more sensitive than perhaps they would be in terms of engaging anyway, because the priority is obviously manufacturing more tests and getting that out, and as well as the equipment to NHS frontline workers. So that's seen a different approach, I think, at the moment. On employment, it affects everybody at the moment. The furlough scheme is completely new in the sense of it cuts across all different types of businesses, different, as George listed some sectors earlier in terms of tourism and leisure and pubs. It, you know, it can affect every single business. So that's extremely concerning in terms of how people approach that. And it's obviously that's why we listen to the press conferences every day, and it's getting that information, disseminating it to clients. On the education side, we've got completely different challenges, because obviously children are at home, exams are being cancelled, and there was a alert this morning about the NUS calling for university exams to be postponed. So there's a whole bunch of things going on, and I also laughed when you talked about planning ahead, but these businesses and these clients have to think ahead to a certain point, because their business model, their approach, their whole approach that has always been their approach, is no longer going to be the same. So the status quo, as George said, will absolutely change, and I think that will be the case in all three of those areas, as well as, frankly, every other sector.
So in that sense, there is potential for, considerable change in direction of policy, or thinking about it, or the way that things are talked about.
I think definitely the way things are talked about and the way things are thought about. I think and then hopefully that will shift policy into a certain extent, because the thinking and the talking will feed into that. But I want to echo what George said about the government doing an incredible job of getting mobilised as quickly as they have, and the civil service in particular, and trying to hear the case of businesses throughout those sectors that we've mentioned, in order to try and make these almost daily announcements as feasible and as effective as they can be, because it's something that would normally take a lot of time and a lot of thought, and there just isn't that opportunity to have that time and thinking space at the moment.
No. And can we talk a little bit about the industry as a whole? Obviously, both of you are on the Public Affairs Board. Tiffany, you obviously head up the Next Gen sort of work stream. But George, I know that as co-chair for the board as a whole, there are certain themes that you had set out, last year, really, about the focus for 2020. In terms of your role in the industry and bringing people together, if we take something like, let's focus on Next Gen. How as an industry is it possible to make sure that as much as possible, younger people are still skilling up, are still developing, are still gaining the experience they're going to need when all this is over, if actually they're working from home and they're not able to have the same sort of in-person experience of training and development?
So one of the things we're doing, so as chair of Next Gen, we started a news, I'm trying to think, months ago, like years ago, and we started a newsletter in September, to just let people know what we're doing, and frankly to ask people what they would like to see us do. The March newsletter is non-existent currently, because I was waiting for sign off on a couple of things, but we're hoping as a committee, there's 15 of us on the committee, about how people have been finding working from home, what they would have found useful, whether they've spoken to colleagues about what they would like to see from us, and we're, touch wood, hopefully signing off in the next couple of days a series of 4 workshops one every 2 weeks for Next Gen members, up to 15 per session, on skills and situations, and a lot of them adapting to the current situation. So we do hope that there are things that we can still offer, and we will be offering them, and the newsletter will still be going ahead monthly, starting with April, hopefully, with the dates for those sessions. So there are things that we can do, and there are things that we want to do, and it's just adapting to the situation and working out the best way to be the most helpful, hopefully.
And to hear what people need and what they feel that they want. Yeah,
exactly.
And George, I know, again, in terms of the board as a whole, there was a lot of talk when I was at your conference last year about diversity and initial information gathering about the people in the industry and how to bring about greater diversity over the longer term. At a time like this, what does that sort of imperative look like in practice?
Yes, this has been one of the priorities of the board since myself and Emma Patella were elected as the co-chairs last year. You might not know my backstory, but I'm a gay man who comes from the Scottish Highlands, and I was brought up in a council house. My dad was a bus driver, my mother was a cleaner. So for me, ensuring that the profession reflects truly the society that we live in as a personal priority, and is also a priority of Emma, who's my co-chair. TIFF has led a group within the Public Affairs Board which is focused on, delivering a number of tangible things that make a difference. We can't change everything overnight, but we can certainly make a difference. We're working very closely with women in public affairs. We put out a call on International Women's Day for all agencies to do a number of things that would help improve the position, and that remains a priority. Tiff, do you want to say something about the priorities?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, in terms of how it works and how we're trying to forward it in this time where we're not all together and it's not as easy to get things done. So just this week I had a call with another Public Affairs Board colleague with Rare Recruitment, to talk about the methods and the ways in which the industry as a whole can adapt and actively intervene to make changes in terms of how to improve diversity and inclusion from the recruitment side of things, particularly at the graduate level coming in. We're also at the stage where we're hoping for the whole board to undertake unconscious bias training, because I think that's hugely important as a step to promote how we see things, and how we can improve that. Because if you don't recognise that there are barriers to different groups, then how on earth are you going to facilitate their entry into the profession? So that's the two main things that we're hoping to push on in the next couple of weeks. As George said, we work closely with Women in Public Affairs, and we had a few events that we were hoping to co-sponsor with them in terms of leadership lunches for senior women, but also different events around the UK, because one of the issues that we have often is that it's very London centric with what we do. Unfortunately, those events have had to be put on ice, but we're trying to work out, and I'll be picking up with Women in Public Affairs, I was going to say later this week, it's Thursday, probably tomorrow or next week, on whether there's potential to deliver these virtually. So it is still a priority for us. It's absolutely not something that will stop when either I am no longer chair of Next Gen and therefore sit on the board. With George and Emma's support, we can see tangible benefits by the time the elections come in the summer, but I have no doubt that this will continue to be a priority for the board.
And I guess, are there, so things that were already in play will continue? They'll might look a bit different in practice, but they are not going to become less of a priority. Are there things for the industry as a whole that potentially become more of an opportunity in terms of its progress, or opening it up, or changing the industry for good, in both senses of that word, in the long term and for the better? Are there ways in which, however challenging this is, there might be opportunities that are opened up? Do
you mean in relation to diversity, or in relation to the industry?
It could be diversity, but I meant generally. I mean,
generally.
might things arise from this situation that offer the industry an opportunity to do things differently, for the better, which otherwise might have fallen by the wayside or just not been thought of?
Yeah, I don't think that this crisis is going to change the fundamentals of public affairs. Tiff talked about it earlier. You need to have a robust argument. You need to craft it carefully. You need to chime with government policy. You need to effectively articulate that to the people that matter, and you need to apply pressure where you need to be. You need to apply pressure. So, the fundamentals of public affairs and of effective communications haven't changed, but how we deliver that and how we operate within our in-house teams or within our consultancies undoubtedly will change. I've got to be really honest with you. I am not a working from home type of person. I'm a people person. I love coming into the office. I love chatting to clients, love chatting to staff, love chatting to stakeholders. I love to go to networking events and lunches and dinners. I like to be out and about, just engaging with people. But this is for just talking about myself, this is a kind of transformative moment. This whole I've now been in my house for 3 weeks because I had to self-isolate before the big lockdown began because I got a bit of a cough after a trip to Japan, and everybody was worried about me. And so I've had to adapt, and it's proven to me a kind of a greying 50-year-old man who has that you can do things differently. And I think that could be a liberating experience for many in-house teams and for many consultancies. I'm a great believer in the trust agenda, to trust your people, and if you trust your people, they'll do a good job. And I do think that this whole moment will turbocharge, the way in which we work. But that's not just something that's going to apply to public affairs. That's going to be something which is a societal thing as well. When I go back to the office, once all this is over, I'll look at the large office and I'll look at how much rent we're paying, and I'll be thinking, do we really need to have an office this large? So I think there are going to be lots of implications of this, this episode.
Yes, I was thinking of all the things I'm missing, and then I was imagining the idea that I was ever going to have to commute again and how I was ever going to get back into that routine. Tiffany, do you have anything to add around sort of ways in which this might actually, however challenging, open up opportunities for the industry?
I think it's certainly, I agree with George, and I think that and I've always been a fan of, just because something's been done that way before doesn't mean that that's necessarily still the most effective and efficient way of doing it. And I think that this has just been a complete catalyst to that way of thinking, and where people have potentially been reluctant to change anything before in terms of either messaging or communications just in general, that is absolutely going to change. I think that, on a wider point, I think it will definitely affect how politics is done. I think in terms of we've already heard mentions of virtual parliament and what that looks like, and lots of people say that parliament needs to change anyway, and I think this will also potentially be a catalyst for how we're governed, and how our laws are made. But we'll see. That's very long-term thinking at the moment, but I do think that there are opportunities coming down the line.
It does feel like that though, doesn't it? It feels like there are some things that are happening now that even if we can't identify what they are right now, we'll never go back to how they were.
Yeah, I completely like the commute as well. My phone flashed up and told me that Citymapper was ready for my commute, and I was like, in what world?
I know, yeah. Okay, I think we're probably ready to draw the conversation to a close. I just wanted to ask you each before we do finish. Obviously, these are challenging times for yourselves and your colleagues, and of course for your clients and business as a whole. There's a very personal impact of this pandemic on people. But in terms of public affairs and the next, 2-3 months, are there things that after the last couple of weeks you're thinking, do you know what, I think over the next 2-3 months I'm going to really aim to move the dial on a particular thing? Tiff, do you want to start?
I was just going to take a minute to think about it, but I might ask you to come back to me if that's okay.
Okay.
Sorry, George.
No, it's a challenge. We're so busy at the moment. It's hard just to think ahead. I think we should just stick to the basics. This is what what I've said to the team that I work with is, you need to stay close to your clients. You need to continue to add value to your clients, and you just need to continue to deliver for your clients. And that's really the message, I think, that's equally as relevant for in-house teams. You want to stay close to the other functions, to the central functions who are managing this crisis. You want to add value to these people, and you want to stay relevant and keep delivering for them. I would finish this chat, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I'd finish it where I began. Public affairs has never been more important as the government has expanded its role and its powers over companies and individuals. And if there was ever a time for public affairs, it's here and now, and I think that will continue through the crisis, as we get out of the crisis and then into the recovery period.
Okay, thanks, George. Tiffany?
I would just add to what George said about obviously adding value to clients is critical, but I think also where clients can add value to government in a space where they have very limited capacity to do anything else, I think is hugely important. And if that's that the client will potentially down 2-3 months down the line have more space to think about how policy can change on that front, then absolutely they should take that opportunity. But as George said, at the moment it's kind of all hands on deck to think of how to best help clients, as well as how to help them navigate what on earth is going on a daily basis.
Okay, well listen, I've really enjoyed this conversation as well, and I appreciate that you're both extremely busy, so thank you very much for your time today and our learning around the technicalities of having this kind of discussion from our homes. It would be great to be able to sort of, you know, pick this up again in a few weeks' time and reflect on what might look different at that point. But I'd just like to say thank you both for sharing your own experiences and I think saying things that are of value to the whole industry. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. And for those of you watching, thank you very much for bearing with us today. And I hope you have found that useful and interesting. And I'm sure during this time, if there's anything you'd like to pick up with any one of us, then please do get in touch. Thanks very much.